Khususambula. Tonight we'll be talking about RTI Act. Do we require one? Some experts and some social media users say we need an RTI is must. Well then, if you have RTI, will it guarantee access to information? Will it guarantee greater access to information? Will it guarantee information at all cost? Or if you go by the draft, one of the disturbing clauses that you will see in that draft is officials who are supposed to share information or disseminate information to the public in the interest of the public could also at the same time find excuses not to share information. So, is the battle just going to start, or will these, after having an act, be an end of battle? We will discuss this. For more discussions, I have Honorable Member of Parliament from the opposition party, Mr. Dzongkha. I have Dzongkha, who came here in her own capacity. She has no designation that I could use for now to introduce her. That's in our own words. And finally, I have Honorable Member of National Council, Mr. Sangi Khandola. Thank you so much for being here. And I also have Mr. Lekidoji from the ruling party, Honorable Member of Parliament from the ruling party, who came here on observation. And as promised earlier, he is not going to share anything, but on observation as a member of legislative committee. Right, sir? Thank you for being here anyway, sir. Now, to start with, I think ladies first, right? Honorable members of Parliament have shared their views during our Dzongkha session. So, to start with, Dzongkha, why do you think we need this act?
I think you have actually not even asked me whether we need it. The thing is, yes, I do feel we need the Right to Information Act, but my question is more on, are we ready for that?
Are we ready?
And especially the way it is right now, the RTI, the form that it has taken, is it the right one? So that is my question now.
So what would be your answer then? You've asked two
You've
questions.
already reached the conclusion that I have, which is I feel that we actually need to take time to deliberate a little more on the RTI. And meanwhile also there are a lot of systemic changes that are required that will gear up or get the public institutions ready, the public offices ready to take on the right to information.
Okay. Mr. Sangi Khandu, what do you think? Are we not rushing too fast?
I think any time is as good a time as any, but I think the earlier the better. I say the earlier the better because without RTI law, which has a provision about management of information and mismanagement of information could be penalized. I think there are risks involved in seeing information that we have today perhaps disappearing. And I think that is the danger we face. Secondly, I think it is very critical also to already start working on a system which respects and values information and therefore manages it with more care and importance, so that for posterity we do have I suppose in many ways we could call it history in bits and pieces in the form of information. But I think more importantly, I agree with the debate really is not whether we need one or not. I think the debate is really the form and the shape the legislation will eventually take.
Yes.
But I thought it was very important at this point to actually make one point very clear. There have been discussions on social media which actually says that there are some countries which took a good number of years to actually have RTI. But my only response to that doubt is that they did not have an RTI provision in the fundamental rights article in the Constitution. Their fight was not about RTI law. Their fight was really in the interpretation of the Constitution, which did not have a provision which spelled out the right to information as a fundamental right that we have in our country. So we're very lucky in that way.
Yes, sir. Honorable Dzongkha, what do you think? As discussed earlier, now when you have this section in the Constitution, Article 7, Section 3, which states that all Buddhists should have right to information. Now, after you have that, why do you need a separate act? Follow the Constitution.
Thank you. The Constitution is is the mother of all laws, which means the fact that there is a clause in the Constitution doesn't mean that we should not have acts. To implement that provision of that Constitution, we should have acts. After the act is being passed, then we have so many bylaws, the rules, regulations, how to implement that. Then people could, just because it is in the Constitution, then if you don't have how to implement it, if you don't have rules, regulations, the acts, then, people could take it anyways. They could directly say it is guaranteed by Constitution, I have the right to do that. So it will be, it will be very difficult to implement that particular right.
Yes.
So
yes.
To have a systematic way of, giving rights, we need to have acts. So
yes.
that is why I think it is very important that we have acts, although it is in the Constitution.
Yes.
So likewise, we have many acts based on the particular provision in the Constitution. So we will have laws regarding environment, regarding ministries, how things will do.
Okay. Chawantashi, you mentioned about you not being so comfortable with the current form or shape that the RTI draft has taken, believing that you have gone through the draft.
Yes.
What is that clause or what is that element in the draft which really makes you feel this discomfort?
Okay. To speak very broadly, I would say two things. One is the contradictory position that is taken within the RTI regarding having the right to information and then also having the right to deny. And especially in the denial, the conditions under which you can deny, to be more specific, leaves a lot of discretionary, a lot of discretion that can be used in defining what is the condition under which you can deny the information. So in a way, you might actually be not giving that right to information at all. Then the other one is that the Act is not very clear on these conditions. So in a way, it's very cumbersome in terms of procedures also, because you have set forms within which you have to fill, and then only can you claim that information. And of course, it says in the RTI that the information officers and their personnel are supposed to provide that assistance to fill in the forms. But will that actually happen in an efficient way? Will the help come at all? Or if it comes, will it be efficient? That is one other thing. Then also with regard to the redressal, I feel that having a redressal course that leads only to the courts could actually, courts means it's always going to be a long procedure. So we require something like customer rights sumbe, where you have immediate and quicker and more accessible course of redressal.
Not anybody can go to court, or not anybody can proceed to the court. Suppose
Yes, it
somebody
will require a lot of time,
Yes.
time consumption. Courts means there's a lot of procedures to be met before you actually put in the case, and then after that you have to spare the time to be there in attending the courts and explaining your position. And so I don't know if people really find it very easy, the right to information.
Okay. Mr. Sangyandu, we already talked about the advantages that RTI would have on those who know about this act.
Yeah.
But what about the rural mass? They may not really know much about this act. And even if they have this, we live in a very hierarchical society. And because of that, it in itself serves to be an obstacle to let people know about the act. And even if people know about the act, will they be able to raise their concerns as expected or as given the authority by the act?
Before I try and respond to you, let me try carry a little off what Song was talking about. The reason why we may actually need a law is precisely because the Constitution says it's a fundamental right. And we all know under Article 7, anybody can approach the High Court and the Supreme Court. It's a constitutional case. But we also know people in Tashigan, Radhi, Sakting will not be able to come all the way to Thimphu as a farmer. We also must understand people in Lunana cannot come to Thimphu all the way. First of all, they may not understand. Secondly, it's a little too off. It's very expensive for them.
Yes.
And therefore, administrative mechanism to resolve this difference before going to the court. We're talking about a mechanism where we have an office who is concerned, then we have appellate authority, then we have eventually the courts. So the whole aim is so that we don't burden our judicial system, which is already overburdened. Secondly, it cuts down on expenses because a person in the Dzongkha doesn't need to come to Thimphu. He or she can resolve it in the Dzongkha, in the Gyawak. That's how I foresee it. Now to come back to your question, which was about the rural masses. And I would like to pick it up from there because I've been in Parliament for the last 5 years. And when I mentioned or tried to discuss RTI, my experience has always been very rural-centric. Yes. Urban because I've worked here, I've been here, so I understand. But rural, I was exposed to simple situations where you discuss RTI. It's never really about strategic information or defense. You know, it's not about big money. It's always about small things which are very relevant to everybody. And therefore, when you're pushed to the corner, you're bound to defend yourself. And even as a farmer, you may be a hierarchical society. We may be, intimidated by this and that. But when it comes to your family's livelihood, and when your own life is at stake, people will ask for information for simple things like a government has made a promise. Where has that promise advanced? How far has it progressed? That is a question. You have a farm road. The farm road is supposed to come by the end of the year. If it doesn't come, the farmer wants to know because his vegetables are not getting to the market and therefore his family is not living the way he planned it. And therefore maybe his son or daughter in the high school, in the private high school, doesn't get the fees on time. So he's pushed to the corner. He's bound to ask, why is the farm road not coming here on time? Today he is asking the question, but he's suppressing it because he doesn't know where to ask the question. He requests BBS to come to his village because he wants to vent out his questions so that he's hoping for a response. Now, if that is to say that we don't need RTI in the grassroots, I don't know what more evidence you need. Because to me, that is the most convincing circumstance under which RTI is needed.
Yes, yes. Thank you. We have a first caller online. Hello. Okay, our first caller online. Could you please introduce yourself? Hello.
Hello.
Yes, please introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, I'm Wachula from Paro.
Okay, Mr. Wachula. Your views, your question. Okay, so sorry we lost Mr. Wangchu. But similar question, maybe I should ask this same question to Honorable Druptop as well. What do you think? For a simple farmer in your constituency, what would RTI mean? And what should he or she do with this act?
It is very important that we first, right after we pass this RTI Act, firstly, it is very important that we tell them, we inform them, we explain to them this is how it works, the whole system, the whole procedure, the whole bylaws, right after we draft it. It is not only the responsibility of that concerned ministries to advocate on such laws. People at times say, ignorance of law, we didn't know anything, so that's why we did it. So this should not happen. This is very important law, like I said. This is a very important act because this concerns almost every citizen, That's why even in the farmers, even in our rural villages, like my colleague mentioned here, any kind of information, they might go to the Gyawak center to ask, but so far, they have been just asking, but they have no idea that it is their right. But now, they will know that unless that particular office gives them an answer, they will not stop there. They have the right to go further. Why are you not giving me this information? Why, we have complained about, let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, they have idea that, certain budget is being approved for a particular activity in a village. So, but they found out that that activity is never being carried out. So far, they will just raise their voice saying that how it happened, but they cannot make somebody obliged to give them the answer. But now with this act, they can tell that particular concerned official, if I'm obeying, I'm following the RTI rules and then putting this question formally to you, now you are obliged to give me that answer. So that's how they are benefited.
Yes. Dzongkha, now talking about implementation, we might have thousands and thousands of laws and rule book, but implementation has been a serious problem. Now, if implementation is a serious problem, when it comes to RTI Act, who do you think should implement? Is it not every citizen of this country? If every citizen of this country is going to enjoy benefits out of this act, then will it not be every citizen of this country implementing this act rather than waiting for some agencies or officials to impose or implement?
Actually, on all the readings I've done on the RTI, my one question was also who's going to be responsible. Of course, it says the government, but who in the government? So that ownership, I feel, is very, very important because you need to have somebody who's accountable. My own worry is that already, like I said, I mentioned that time, the systemic problems. The civil servants, we are, sorry, I'm ex-civil servant, but I still say we, are very burdened with a lot of procedures. And that happens when you have the acts and the rules.
Yes.
So when you have acts and then the rules come, there are so many procedures. And then on the other side, you have the RCSC going on a small and compact and efficient government policy. So every office you go to, you see there's a manpower shortage. And in my 24 years of career as a civil servant, what I see is it's not actually a manpower shortage, but because the manpower is fully used up in looking after procedures. So I've always been advocating for cutting down on procedures, even in the civil service. And so this kind of burden, if we could lighten. And one sure way is also knowing exactly who will be responsible. And I would really think it should be the Ministry of Information, Information and Communication, that should be the parent agency, actually.
Okay, we'll come back to that. But before that, take another call. Hello, Ola. Hello, Ola.
Hello.
Good
evening, sir.
Good evening, sir. Your introduction, please.
My name is Shekhar. I'm calling from Punakhala.
Okay, sir.
I just want to ask our honorable parliamentarians on the panel for discussion there. Could you please highlight on the ingredients of this RTI Act? Because my feeling is most of the information in our country, given the size of the country, is covered by media. And then I have a concern, what are some of the ingredients of this RTI Act and what benefits it is going to bring to poor people? So my feeling here is most of the time our elected members, they play blame game, and then the act is passed, it is on the table, it is in the paper, but when it comes to implementation, hardly any rule is implemented in Bhutan, I should say that. Because I say this because poor people, they do not know what is happening in Dzongkha, what project is implemented in their villages. Dzongkha, what is happening in the Dzongkha, poor people, they do not know. What is happening in the ministry, poor people, they do not know. And most of the time, even in a simple meeting, people are just, there is some authority, they dictate people, okay, come here. They do not know what is all meeting about. And then they get sometimes thrashing, and then poor people, they go back. But they do not get, the real value of the meeting is not told to the people. The real story is not told. So these are some of the feelings that I have. And then I think the present government should look into it, and then I think things will improve. And I hope finally this RTI Act, if implemented properly, will give some benefits to our people. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Mr. Sanghihandu, poor people do not know anything. So will RTI help them to know everything?
Thanks, Dawa, and thank you, Shekhar. I wouldn't want to really polarize discussion by saying rich and poor. I think it's really about information gap, not really referring to wealth accumulation, status. I think in the rural places, first instance, when you talked about Zomdus and the significance of it, people not understanding what's happening, I think this is really dissemination of information. And a way RTI would address it is actually RTI requires this proactive disclosures, a set of things they have to proactively disclose. And a part of that is processes, procedures, which would basically then places where people can read, it could be put up. But for places where people can't read, they have to explain it. Which means when you have a Zomdu, there has to be a standard format where in the most efficient way the time is used to explain to people what is actually being discussed. That is information that is flowing on a more proactive basis. But then there are also instances where Mr. Shekhar seems to be of the opinion that our Bhutanese media seems to take care of all people's need for information. I wish we could do that, but nowhere in the world media could take care of everyone's concerns. And therefore, RTI is a really customized platform or tool for individuals to seek out information that really concerns them and their community, which may not be covered in entirety by media, and sometimes may not even be covered because it may seem like a very trivial issue to the media given its vast mandate. But to a community, it may be the whole world, For instance, you look at my people in Lunana, my constituents there. What happens there may not be the national importance, but what happens in Luna will be certainly a very big thing for them. So the question could be very community-centric, which may not be of interest to the nation. And therefore, in these ways, the form and the shape of RTI will definitely be able to help people who have this information gap, because it will push the government to make sure people understand what is happening.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dutop, the blessings of democracy is already felt by our people, and because of that, one would believe that people, even in the rural areas, would now, by now, would raise their voice or share their voice if need be. So, keeping this in mind, do you think our people should by now, or if at all the act comes through, then will people be able to use it or implement it? Or do we need more and more education for people to understand what this act is all about and then later think of implementing?
I think democracy means good governance. Good governance could come only because when there is transparency. I think that's very important. And transparency means you have to get access to information. Everyone, almost every citizen, that is their fundamental right as per our constitution. So which means, like Mr. Shekhar said, he had so many queries in his question. Why we didn't know this, why those acts were not implemented. That same queries, same questions, doubts can be raised through RTI. He can say, he can ask that concerned officers, concerned authority, why such things are not implemented, why these acts are not implemented. Although, like I mentioned earlier, it is very important that we educate them. The concerned ministries, the concerned agencies should inform and educate our citizens. This is the act we have in place. These are the rules. These are the bylaws. These are the guidelines to get your information. Then only I think that the whole system will ultimately achieve its goal.
Yes. You can ask hundreds and hundreds of questions like Mr. Shekhar did. But what is the guarantee that you have in getting the answers by having the act? Because as informed earlier, there's this clause which says, exemptions could be made in areas like while an official is discharging his official duty. Now, what would that official duty mean? I can find out excuses after excuses not to share information if it is not in my interest or if it is not in the interest of promoting my agency.
Very true, Dawa. There can be, those concerned authorities can make excuses, but we need to be very clear in our act. Firstly, then we have to define, we have to make bylaws based on the acts. We have to come up with our rules, regulations, and then those implementers, if they try to hide certain information, not obeying the rules and regulations, then we have to go to the next level. That is, we have to go to the next appellate. We have to go to their ministry as per this draft act. We can go to the ministry and appeal to them why certain informations are not given, and that particular authority has to explain in writing why he is not eligible for such information. So those things are also given in the draft. And like I said, the most important thing is to make sure that the bylaws, after we pass this act, the bylaws are so clear, bylaws are implementable. Of course, it will go on changing, but somehow we should ultimately, we should intend to provide information to the people.
Yes. Dzongkha, do you fear or do you see any problems in violating or misusing or abusing this act if it is passed at all?
I see plenty. From the beginning, I was saying there's a lot of discretionary grounds that are left open. So it depends on what is the position that the official who is being asked the information takes, or that public office. And if they want to make excuses right now, the way the RTI is, there are 101 excuses that can be made, like you said. But if I could just add on what Dr. had been talking about, my objection, even as a civil servant, has always been that why do we presume, always start with the basic premise that only the educated and the office bearers know best. It's not really about going and educating the public, but about educating the office bearers and the responsible people on what the public want, actually. So this requires really vigorous public debates where we involve a lot of common people, not just MPs and known figures, especially from the rural areas. And that would be a much more fruitful debate, which will lead to a more implementable, a more sensible Right to Information Act, I think.
Okay. Next caller online. Hello.
Hello.
Okay. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay.
With your introduction, please.
Greetings to panelists. As I'm very much interested in RTI as a responsible citizen, I do know about RTI of India, RTI Act of India, whereby the implementing the body is like Central Information Commission of India or something like. But in case of Bhutan, last year, as I know, there's a heavy depth or accountability in Ministry of Information and Communication was little weak. I feel that implementation by Ministry of Information and Communication is a little doubt for me. So how can panelists explain that?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your question. Maybe let me put this to Mr. Sangihandu. Now, Dzongkha also proposed that the owners or ownership of this act or custodian of this act should be Ministry of Information and Communication. What do you think?
I share the opinion the young gentleman just shared with us, and that is, I see there's a possibility of conflict of interest because the Information Communication Ministry is under the executive. And I imagine that if there's information that is needed on the ministry itself, you approach the ministry, perhaps, I'm not trying to accuse anybody, but it's a possibility that they would hide information. And given the provisions that Otsong just talked about, the broad definition of what information could be exempt, I think there's every chance that information could be said, because under Section 30, there are 3 provisions which says if substantial resources needs to be diverted to share the information, if the work of the office could be impeded because of sharing of the information, if the head of the agency feels that the information doesn't need to be shared. Under these circumstances, the information could be easily denied. And I think given these clauses, it's even more critical that we have an independent body which administers the law. And I imagine an independent authority would also take the time to draft a rule and regulation without necessarily being inclined or biased towards a certain agency. I think that is very important. The credibility of the implementation of the law would really depend on that. Secondly, I just want to get back to what Aung talked about, what Tukta talked about, the rural Bhutanese population. And I think the demand is there. Our people just don't know how to call it RTI, but the queries are there, the questions are there. And what RTI would do is really bridge that gap, bring the demand and supply side together. But I agree with Aung, and given her tall years of experience in the civil service, I wouldn't question her experience. Our civil servants would need to be trained, and Section 62 does that. It gives the responsibility to the government to make sure that all civil servants who deal with information are trained. And I think given that, people just need to know what questions they could ask and what questions they can't ask. Questions are there plenty. Questions are there plenty.
Okay. Mr. Dutta, okay. Before I move on to you, we have another caller waiting. Hello, Ola. Hello, Ola.
Hello, Ola. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, sir.
And good evening to all the panel members. My name is Kini Dojil. I'm calling from Thimphu.
Okay, sir.
I just want to share some views. And just one question. I'd just like to share the information. Information, for me, I personally feel that is power. Because anybody who have access to information, has the power. For example, if you are a town planner, and or you're a policy maker, you have access to information before anybody has. So sometimes there are instances where people, before the information becomes public, they buy land at a cheaper rate and then they get access to information because they have access to information. So in that way, people take undue advantage of these kind of things. So my question is, in the RTI Act, people have the right to information, but is there anything about the right to be informed? Like people have the right to be informed. So because I haven't seen the act myself, but I feel that people should also be informed, not just because, it shouldn't be like people just come and ask for information and then they only get information, but also that before they ask the question, they should be informed on important matters of the country or whatever. For example, the pedestrian day which was introduced last year. I read in an article saying that the people were not informed because they said they didn't want to take too many information from the people. So it came as a surprise to the people. And that is one way that it didn't work out. So just, my question is, does the Act also says that people should also be informed before they come and ask for information?
Okay. Mr. Sangyandu, you raised it.
Quickly sum it up. First thing is, there's a proactive disclosure provision, and I think there will be debate to expand it or contract it. So I think the concerns are noted. But more importantly, on a submission I made during the Dzongkha session as well, people who misuse information need to be penalized. And what our friend Kile just shared was privileged information. Some people have privileged information, and if that information is misused, there should be a penalty clause where these people can be penalized. And we have a slightly softer penalty, which is a mechanism which is declaring conflict of interest. But in case the conflict of interest is not declared, then what then? I think that provision needs to be there.
Okay. So one question that was raised, was, should people be informed without having to be asked to be informed?
That's something I've always propagated myself too. And in fact, just before I resigned, there was this DIT, which is trying to make this common hub for all the government offices. Yes. And they were on a consultation meet with the Minister of Finance, and I was present during that meeting. And to my surprise, the people from DIT were asking Minister of Finance, is there any information you would not like to, on the common web, that you'd like to keep it out of? And I was surprised because I was saying transparency is something we've been propagating all along for a very, very long time. And especially because the chief role of the government, the reason why the government exists is because it's supposed to work for the people. And if you're working for the good of the people, what is there to hide? So, in fact, I was urging them, please put the private sector also on this common hub so that they don't have to come to offices to ask for information, that they get it, when they can refer whenever they want. So these are the kind of things that need to change within the government itself before RTN or things like RTI can become successful.
Yes, sir. Mr. Druptop, have this RTI Act, which will guarantee you access to information. But once you are guaranteed access to information, how you avail those information could also be a question that needs to be asked. Because some, by having this act, might steal information, which is not done rightfully, and that may not be legitimate. Some would to unlawfully get information from sources that may not be named. So in this regard, what do you do then? Is it taken care by the draft law? Have you seen any clause there?
Honestly, I don't remember seeing that, when there is misuse of information. There is some clause which says if a third party wants to use information, they should get
More than the misuse, how you get information?
How you get information?
Is it mentioned there?
No. It is.
So then the fact is, let me put this to all three of you. The fact of the matter is, now you have RTI Act. So get information as much as you want and get it the way you want. So some, because there are some discretionary powers with the information provider, that's why you're not able to get it, but then you steal the information. Can this be taken care of by the Act?
Normally, the experience with other countries and democracies has been that what precedes the RTI is the Official Secrecy Act. And what it does is it classifies information into categories, and it actually says what is the timeline for declassification of those sort of information and what are the processes. And therefore, once you categorize the classified information, for stealing classified information and depending on the categories, you have varying degrees of penalty for stealing information. And the RTI is only a legitimate way to get information. And once you get it, it's legitimate, therefore you could use it. But if you steal information, then you have to be penalized for it. And I think even within the society, as a government, also I think it makes sense to have RTI because firstly, you categorize information. Secondly, then you give the information that which is needed for public, but not necessarily everybody needs to know everything. And if somebody steals that information which public don't need to know, that is where people are concerned about national security, and there should be a penalty clause for it. And because we don't have an official, Secrecy Act, I know there's a draft that's been floating around since 2006, because RTI Act, the base of this draft is not something created, all of a sudden. This existed from 2006. This was done by the earlier High Court, and therefore these two acts were there. But now I think the Parliament is really forced to think, is really ponder and see if you want to include that provision of where people steal information which should not be shared and therefore penalty, misuse of information. I think that is a primary concern of a lot of Bhutanese. Okay,
Dzongkha, final words.
Final words.
Would you still be skeptical about the form and shape of RTI?
Yeah. As a common person, I'm just thinking, like I said, it's very cumbersome. And the problem with going even beyond the RTI, the problem with acts and rules is that it introduces a lot of procedures. And we already have a problem. My own experience in the civil service tells me that a lot of the civil servants are just used up on following procedures, making sure procedures are implemented, instead of allowing them quality time for monitoring and review, which is very, very important. And maybe that's why we have good policies, but the implementation, when it comes to the implementation, we always have a problem.
Yes.
So, and then plus, all of us, I think, in the recent past, we have seen what budgetary constraints we face and how much resources we have at our own disposal. And everything new that gets introduced always has its own act, its own rules, and its own set of requirement of manpower. And then that would mean more recruitment, more stress on the already thin budget. So there's a lot of impact on resources, which is both human, financial, besides systemic. So if the already really procedure-tied government is going to have more responsibilities, and the budget is going to be spread even thinner, what is going to be the service to me as a member of the public? I'm worried about that.
Thank you so much. I think this will sum up our discussion tonight. Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Druptop and Mr. Sangikhandu, and also Dzongkha. Thank you so much for your time. Well, with this, we come to the end of our program. Thank you so much for watching. And the bottom line is, I think more than anything else, we would only like to inform you that we will continue with this advocacy program. We will continue with the debate. Debate will keep going on. Let's see what happens after the act is passed, or if at all it's being deliberated. Then more and more educational programs will follow. Thank you so much for watching People's Voice. Good night.